Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Stories for Progress, an update on Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research's FDA patient listening session on pulmonary sarcoidosis. I'm Mindy Buchanan, Director of Patient Programs, and I'd like to go over some quick housekeeping for today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you within 2 business days. Attendee cameras will remain off and you will be muted for the duration of the webinar. However, if you would like to submit a question or comment, please do so in the chat. As you will see, the chat functionality is set to chat the host and panelists only, and therefore other attendees will not see your submissions. We have a lot in store for you tonight, and I'd like to share a bit about the agenda for tonight's webinar. We'll begin with Mary Mcgowan, FSR CEO, who will highlight the background for developing the FDA patient listening session. Next, we'll hear from FSR Scientific Advisory Board member and Global Sarcoidosis Clinic Alliance founding member, Dr. Lisa Meyer of National Jewish Health, who will provide the scientific and research perspective presented during the patient listening session. We'll then have Diane Driscoll, FSR Global Head of Clinical Engagement, who will share insights into the process of building the patient listening session. This will be followed by Tricia Shivas, FSR Chief Strategy Officer, who will join to moderate the panel discussion with the patient speakers from the patient listening session. We will then have a Q&A portion. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Mary Mcgowan, CEO of FSR.
Thank you, Mindy, and good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to present this webinar to you, and we were overwhelmed by the response of the registrations. So thank you for spending the evening with us as we talk about and highlight this milestone event for the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, what a listening session is for those of you who may not be aware, why it's important and why FSR, it was important for us to do this, what the goals and the purpose in conducting a listening session is. And as you hear me talk, I hope you recognize that we felt it was so important to hear from our stakeholders in planning this really important event. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then also just how we framed the conversation and some key messages and how we came up with those key messages. So we'll get started. Mindy, next slide, please. So the first thing I'd like to do is give a very warm thank you to the Geese Foundation. As everyone on the call tonight recognizes, FSR is a nonprofit and we can't do our work without generous support. And the Geese Foundation gave some support for the FDA patient listening session, and we are so very grateful to them. Thank you. Next slide, please. So just to frame this for everybody, I think everybody knows who the FDA is, but just to refresh, they are the United States Food and Drug Administration, and they are a federal agency of the Department of Health and Human Services. And the FDA is responsible for ensuring the safety, the efficacy, and the security of drugs, biologics, medical devices, as well as food products. Next slide, please. So why did FSR want to be talking to the FDA and hosting this patient listening session? First, FDA is the gatekeeper of approved drugs and the medical technologies in the United States. And as we all know, we're trying to get more approved drugs for sarcoidosis. Sarcoidosis is a rare disease and may be unfamiliar to the FDA. There are so many rare diseases. And FSR had not in the past had an opportunity to hold a patient listening session to give the FDA a good understanding about what it's the lived experience of living with sarcoidosis from patients and from care partners, as well as the scientific and research part of sarcoidosis. So we recognize this, and this was an important endeavor. Sarcoidosis is also very complex, and it requires the FDA to give it specialized attention as the standard practices for drug approval. As we all know, sarcoidosis can impact multiple organs and does. And so we wanted to make sure that we were bringing and talking about these, complexities. Sarcoidosis has unique challenges impacting clinical trial participation and design. And also we wanted to ensure that we are always, as you know, for the foundation, keeping the patient voice at the center. And this includes being at the center of all aspects of drug development. So this we felt was very important to hold this patient listening session, again, to put the patient voice at the center. And we also want to continue to build awareness for sarcoidosis among the FDA, as well as NIH and pharmaceutical companies. And so these are some of the reasons why we felt it was important to schedule and host a patient listening session with the FDA. Next slide, please. So what are patient listening sessions and what are they not? So they are discussions between staff and patients and caregivers and advocates with the FDA. And it's really an opportunity to share the disease burden, to talk about treatment and disease management burden, the impact on daily life of living with sarcoidosis, and really to be able to emphasize and explain the unique challenges and burdens. And what are patient listenings not? Well, they're not public. This is a private event. It could not be recorded. People could not, participate other than those who were sharing information with the FDA. So it was a small, intimate group. They're not advisory, and they are not open to any industry partners. Next slide, please. So we felt it was really important as part of the process. One of the first things that we did was to reach out to the sarcoidosis community. We wanted to ensure that the messages that we were developing and sharing with the FDA were reflective of the community needs. So we sent out different surveys. We sent out a patient survey. We sent out a survey of caregivers, to clinicians, as well as to industry partners. And we gathered information and gleaned information from those surveys. Next slide, please. So let's look at some of what the patient surveys told us about accurate diagnoses. This is the time to accurate diagnoses. So to summarize this slide, 32% took 4 years or more for diagnosis for patients, for accurate diagnoses. So you can see the breakout here. 47% with sarcoidosis were accurately diagnosed with 1 to 3 years. 4 to 7 years was 20% of the survey response. And then more than 8 years were 12% of the patients. Next slide, please. So we also discovered the tests that were used in the misdiagnoses through the survey. So MRI, 17%, the X-rays, 49%, CT scans, 40%, and biopsy, 7%. So this also gave us some information in terms of the messaging for the patient listening session. Next slide, please. Also, just in terms of understanding the unique burden of the disease. So we asked a question around to the patients, did your health limit activity? And you see significant response here with completely, quite a lot, somewhat, and then a little, and then not at all. And so, we really want to be able to, well, this quote here is a good one from a sarcoidosis patient in the survey: balance drug approval against the high cost of disability and aid necessary to support individuals who cannot work or support their families. We know this is a significant issue in the sarcoidosis patient community. And again, we found this information specific in the patient survey that we did. Next slide, please. So really the need for new therapies, this is not something that's new. We are all well aware of steroids, the use of steroids for treating sarcoidosis, and the significant side effects of steroids. So of course, the weight gain, the moon face, osteoporosis, irritability, high blood sugar, insomnia, and others. And so Again, a patient quote, steroids are the devil, make more medications available that will reduce the number of steroids and let me feel better. There are not enough drugs and the side effects are awful. This was talked quite a bit about with the patients or from the patients to the FDA, and you'll be hearing more about this when the patients speak later on in the webinar. Next slide, please. We also surveyed the clinicians, as I said, and so the need for new approved therapies was paramount within the clinician survey. So it's staggering to look at this. Sarcoidosis patients that are unable to take medications due to cost, they report 84%. That is something that we just have to be moving and doing better on. So this again was one of the talking points. Many medications used for sarcoidosis are not FDA approved, which creates issues with medication coverage with some insurances. We know the significant fight that many sarcoidosis patients are making with insurance companies. And again, this was highlighted a significant talking point during the FDA patient listening session. Another quote, FDA should develop a pathway for drugs to be recognized as indicated therapy for other diseases. Next slide, please. So we also surveyed industry, and they focused really around challenges with the drug approval process. So some of the things that were highlighted within the survey is the limited patients for sarcoidosis, the inconsistent treatment strategies, no clear regulatory path, and no validated quality of life measures. Important information that we gathered from the industry surveys, and again, incorporated in the patient listening session. Next slide, please. So the session itself was held on April 21st. You see a snapshot there of everybody that was on Zoom. Well, not everybody, some of the people. We actually had 50 FDA attendees. We were so very grateful to the FDA and for their interest and for everybody really tuning in to learn more about sarcoidosis. And the 50 participants came from 16 offices and 5 FDA centers. This is really an extraordinary outcome. There are many, many, many patient listening sessions that do not have this type of an attendance from the FDA. So we were most excited about that the day of the event. But the messages are really important, and they're here, the high level, to provide the FDA officials across the agency with deeper understanding of the patient experience, as I said, and the burden of diseases on both those living with chronic pulmonary sarcoidosis and their caregivers. As you know, there was a caregiver, you're going to hear from her shortly, who represented the caregiver community. Another message, to raise the challenges for clinical trial design and barriers to implementation in this space, to bring awareness to the patient's knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs about sarcoidosis clinical trials, to demonstrate the need for better representation of diverse populations and women in trials, and to demonstrate the urgent need for therapy options. Next slide, please. So it's now my honor to introduce Dr. Lisa Meyer, who was really the research and science voice at the FDA patient listening session. We were so honored to have Lisa Meyer to be part of this, and again, honored this evening to have her with us as well. Dr. Meyer is the Chief of Division of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences at National Jewish Health, Professor of Medicine at National Jewish Health, and the Division of Pulmonary and Critical Care Sciences in the Department of Medicine, School of Medicine, and the Environmental Occupational Health Department in the Colorado School of Public Health at the University of Colorado. Dr. Meyer, thank you so much for being with us this evening. And I know everybody's looking forward to the messages that you sent and the science and research that was presented at FDA. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Mary, I want to say that the honor was truly mine to be able to represent this disease and to share some of my concerns with the FDA. And so if you could please give me the next slide. So first of all, one of the points that I really wanted to emphasize to the FDA is that we are lagging behind other similar diseases. And if you'll look at your upper right, left-hand corner here, publications in sarcoidosis have really increased since 2000. They've moved from about 400 up to close to 1,200. Although at the same time, another rare lung disease called idiopathic fibrosis really tripled. Similarly, while we have seen an increase in funding from NHLBI and an interest in this disease, Dr. Louis Vuga, who is our program officer in the area of sarcoidosis and has joined us today, had published a paper showing that if you look at the diffuse lung disease, DLD budget, they have a rare disease budget. 18% of that budget goes to rare diseases. Sarcoidosis fell in this very last category and really composed less than 2% of that budget, of the 18% of the entire DLD. Now, again, I think this has changed. We have seen a number of grants that are being funded. And as I mentioned, I do think NHLBI would like to see more funding. We also are behind other disease in our understanding. So how does the disease present? Again, just for those of you that are on the call, small fiber neuropathy, this painful syndrome that many of our folks with sarcoidosis experienced, we didn't even begin to understand that until the 2000s. Similarly, fatigue that's very disabling. Still, we don't understand why it happens or how we can treat it. And we're still trying to better understand the course of disease. As Mary just mentioned, we don't have a lot of approved treatments. Steroids still are the main drug used in many situations, and sometimes they can cause a lot more hurt than help. Many of us are trying, but haven't yet gotten there to be able to understand the markers of disease, its progression, and how we can tell if somebody's responding to treatment. And I think part of the lag is due to the lack of some of these publications, maybe due to the funding. It's also because, yes, the disease is heterogeneous, but it's also because we haven't been listening to our patients. There's a recent publication in a very top-notch journal that said 30 to 50% of people with sarcoidosis don't have symptoms. That's certainly not what you would glean from what Mary just shared with you, nor if you talk to our patients in clinic. And I think those misperceptions often are also impeding our ability to move this disease forward. Next slide, please. Some other main points that I really wanted to get home to the FDA was it really, the publications, the data seem to be indicating that the burden of this disease is increasing. We're seeing more hospitalizations, higher costs of hospitalizations than patients without sarcoidosis, more death. And those manifestations, those outcomes are varying based on race, gender, and income. The Black women, we know, have the worst outcomes. They have the most severe types of pulmonary disease. They are dying at a higher rate, and women more so than men, and Blacks more than whites, and people of lower income have lower healthcare related quality of life. As I mentioned, we need better therapies with fewer side effects, and we also have problems with treatment gaps. People that have maybe what we consider mild symptoms may not be mild to them, but for example, with the fatigue or mild shortness of breath, we don't have good treatments for those people, and really they end up with pretty poor quality of life. We have a concern that clinical studies really are not considering the entire sarcoidosis patient. Whether those are scientifically oriented studies or industry studies, we are focusing on specific organs, pulmonary or cardiac, and many of our patients have multiple organs, and sometimes they're not included in the studies as a result. Also, sarcoidosis doesn't equal another disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. In that disease, you follow this lung function marker called forced vital capacity. And that doesn't always tell us the whole story in sarcoidosis. Sarcoidosis patients, even if they only have lung involvement, can have a variety of abnormalities that we see, and the FVC or this forced vital capacity is not necessarily the best outcome for all of our patients. In addition, we cannot ignore what our patients are telling us, their reported outcomes or PROs, the fatigue, the quality of life that's been impacted. Next slide, please. So my emphasis and my vision, hopefully, that I think is shared with the FSR and others, is that we really need to come up with some creative approaches to address this disease. We need to revisit how we are designing clinical trials. We need more than just steroid sparing approaches. So many trials for new treatments say you got to be on a steroid and our goal will be to decrease that dose. Well, many of us are trying to get our patients off steroids and they then aren't eligible for these studies. It's also an end-stage cancer model. We're not thinking about the people earlier on and if these drugs will work for them. Again, we have to treat the entire patient. We have to treat disabling symptoms, and we have to be careful about some of these exclusion criteria. Diverse sarcoidosis representation is super important. Gender, race, geography. It can't just be in big cities. We need measures of active disease and inflammation, and a number of studies that NHLBI and others are funding are trying to define those. We have to consider more of a composite, not a one outcome, one endpoint study. And this is already being done by colleagues in rheumatology and asthma. And we have to, again, listen to our patients and their symptoms. And again, continue to support research and funding and have new investigators coming down the pipe to help our patients and address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meyer. Having learned about the strategic build for the meeting and the science behind the message, I am going to give you some insight into our process for focusing on the critical voices that powered this session. As the leading international advocacy organization for patients and caregivers impacted by sarcoidosis, our programming, campaigns, and services have served as a gateway to building relationships with stakeholders in this disease. Next slide, please. So we knew we had a significant population to draw from for our FDA patients and caregiver team. The first thing we did was to survey that population, but we knew that choosing the right people was just the start. The FDA requires a very specific agenda for the meeting, which includes scheduling to the minute. Each speaker would be tasked with communicating their message within the exact parameters of the FDA distinct framework. We started recruiting our team back in February, and thanks to their enthusiasm and willingness to give a significant amount of their free time to this project, we created a detailed curriculum to grow their words into powerful, unfiltered stories, with each one representing tens of thousands living with this rare disease. How did we do that? Well, we engaged the expertise of John Capecci, a communication strategist and coach and author of Living Proof, Telling Your Story to Make a Difference. And that is just what he and our speakers did. Next slide, please. We matched the patients and the caregiver to the direct messages Mary mentioned and you told us were important to send to the FDA. Then we worked with each patient individually to assist them in weaving that message throughout their story. It was an extraordinary process to be a part of as we experienced the evolution of power of their words representing what our patient community emphasized as key messaging over those next 8 weeks that we worked with them. Next slide, please. Some of the comments we pulled out, we have here to share with you. This was a result of the session. We understand the challenges of this complex disease. We encourage patients to work with industry to identify outcomes important to them. The patient testimonials were outstanding and emotional. Yesterday, I cried. I felt so honored to be able to share my story. The training has been phenomenal. My peers are superheroes, and each of you has been so supportive. I cried because for once, I'm not alone. I am surrounded and embraced by a network of passionate leaders who are absolutely fearless. As we mentioned earlier, patient listening sessions are closed, which means we could not record audio or video. However, we were able to document a rehearsal session, and we are thrilled to be able to share this with you today. If you had been part of the FSR-hosted FDA patient listening session on pulmonary sarcoidosis on April 21st, you would have heard a story similar to what Heidi Junk represents here. Let's go to the videotape.
My name is Heidi Junk. Treating my sarcoidosis has been a constant challenge to find a drug that works and that keeps working. It's been a roller coaster of a journey, and it still continues today. 9 years ago, I was diagnosed with sarcoidosis. I remember getting the phone call from the surgeon who had conducted the lung biopsy. I was in the middle of a busy newsroom, working as bureau chief of a Washington news bureau. I walked back to my office, closed the door, and listened as he told me the biopsy confirmed sarcoidosis. I dropped to my knees. He said, "This is good news. It's not cancer. And it should clear up easily with steroids. And then you'll be able to taper off of them." I so wish that had been the case. Over the next 9 months, even with steroids, the nodules and inflammation continued to spread in my lungs. I gasped for air walking short distances. I couldn't climb stairs. In addition to my lungs, a mass the size of a grapefruit grew inside of my liver. The joints in my hands became painful and swollen. I experienced soaking night sweats, fevers, brain fog, a crushing fatigue, and painful neuropathy, myelopathy, and radiculopathies. All of this became so hard to manage that I made the extraordinarily difficult decision to leave a job that I loved and go out on disability. My husband and I sold the 4-story townhouse that we lovingly restored, and we moved to a 1-floor condo. This is when the drug search began. I found a wonderful sarcoidosis expert at Johns Hopkins who explained I had the chronic version of sarcoidosis. He showed me a list of drugs that we could try, and he warned me that all the drugs are used off-label, except for prednisone, and that many could be difficult to get approved by insurance. He also warned me that some drugs might not work for me, and that others might work, but they might only work for a short period of time. I remember thinking, I hope I don't get to the end of this list. We tried methotrexate. I had a severe reaction. Next on the list was Cellcept, and it helped, but it wasn't enough. Then Remicade. It worked for a while, and then it stopped working. In 2018, my specialist said Rituxan was the next best option. It took months of insurance denials, and my doctor had to personally call and plead with my insurance. While I waited, my sarcoidosis flared. I could barely leave my condo, and the waiting was nerve-wracking. When it was finally approved by insurance, I was so relieved, I broke down and I cried. After the first 2 infusions, I saw significant improvement in my symptoms. But after a year, the Rituxan stopped having a positive effect, and we needed something else. Back to the list. In 2019, we tried to get Actemra, but my insurance denied my doctor's request for a year and a half. Insurance had the upper hand and could say that it was experimental and not indicated. I contemplated paying for the treatment out of pocket, but the cost was more than $4,000 a month. I was backed into a corner. My sarcoidosis was aggressive, And yet I couldn't access a drug that my doctor thought could help me. We increased my prednisone to 40 milligrams per day. It was all I could tolerate at the time. I began experiencing a dark depression, and it had me sobbing daily. I was forced to go on Cymbalta, and that drug comes with its own side of serious side effects. When I finally got approval for Actemra, my inflammation was so aggressive, I was on 60 milligrams a day of prednisone. But after waiting a year and a half and putting so much hope into this drug, it didn't do enough to stop the inflammation. This was physically and mentally crushing. Once more, we were back to the list, and I was back on high doses of prednisone. Which leads me to today. The next drug I can try is Cytoxan. This is the last drug on the list, but my doctors have advised me to wait. Given the state of my immune system, they say it's a strong drug and they don't think that my body could handle it right now. I know most of these drugs are not FDA approved, but my flares can't wait for FDA approvals. They happen now and they cause permanent damage. We need more treatment options. Because so many drugs are used off-label to treat sarcoidosis, it creates a wild west of insurance denials and extreme costs out of pocket. It's hard to continually fight this fight when you are already exhausted and sick. Having more drugs available is critically important to my life, my health, and my mental well-being. And not just the development of new drugs, but the repurposing of drugs that have shown great promise. I urge you to create better and swifter paths to making more drugs available. I know there is a treatment out there that will work for me. The science is in place to make it possible. But I'm at the end of the list, and that treatment is not on there. With your help, I will be able to access that treatment, and it will truly change my life. Thank you for hearing my story.
It's now my pleasure to introduce a panel of the speakers, patients and caregivers who shared their story with the FDA. I'm going to run through the list and then I'm going to direct some questions to the panelists. As I say your name, please turn on your camera. Thank you. So who you just heard from is Heidi Junk. Heidi is a patient and a member of the FSR Board of Directors and has been a longtime advocate with FSR. Jim and Jean Kuhn. Jim is a patient advocate, a patient navigator, and a member of the Patient Advisory Committee. He's also been a longtime advocate with FSR. Jean, his wife, is a caregiver and a patient advocate who has been supporting FSR in our efforts. Jessica Reed is a patient and the facilitator of FSR's online support group. Jessica is also a patient advocate, a navigator, and a member of the FSR Women of Color Committee. Erica Courtenay Mann is a patient advocate and a member of the FSR Women of Color Committee. And Catherine Washington is a patient and a member of the FSR Women of Color Committee, as well as being a patient advocate. Great. Mindy, maybe if you can lend some assistance with Catherine being, her camera being available, that would be fantastic. Great, thank you. So Heidi, my first question is for you. Why do you believe that your story was so impactful to the FDA?
Well, thank you for having me tonight. I believe my story was impactful because I had the support of this team and this group, giving me permission to tell the raw and unfiltered version of my story. With the guidance of John Capecci, our communications coach, I was really able to hone in on the most powerful aspects of my story. When I sat down to write it, it was extremely emotional for me. I felt this internal push and pull. because usually I sanitize my story and what's going on with me. And, I don't really normally talk about it. So it felt vulnerable, but it also felt so extremely important. And I wanted the FDA to know the magnitude of the issue. And I wanted my story to drive home with just crystal clear clarity how hard it is for sarcoidosis patients to fight to find treatments that work. And then once they find them, to have to fight insurance on top of that. So I wanted the FDA to really be compelled to act and just really drive that there is this dire urgency for new treatments and for a new pathway to repurpose drugs. In the process, John really challenged me, and he wanted me to drive home that reality by going back again and again to the line that I wrote. And initially I didn't want to emphasize that because it's a reality I don't like facing. And crafting my story helped me to really come to terms with that and acknowledge that this fight is really hard, and that it's the fear is there for me about the progression. And so it was really good for me to acknowledge that in this. So it also helped me realize that I can have peace with this reality, but also fight like heck to change it. So it was definitely very hard to tell the unedited story, but it was empowering because I felt like I was capturing the struggle that we all have as a community. And that was so, so important to me. And I'm so glad that I could be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi, and thank you for sharing that and being so unfiltered and being willing to be vulnerable in that way. It's so impactful. Jim, this reminds me a little bit of what you had shared during your time on the committee. You had shared the same kind of vulnerability underneath what Heidi was talking about and the struggles of daily life. Why do you think that matters for the FDA to understand?
Tricia, I was trying to illustrate to the FDA that sarcoidosis wears your body down over time and slowly steals your life away. Because there is no approved and effective treatment for sarcoidosis, I'm losing valuable moments of my life each and every day. Because of the lack of treatment, I shared with the FDA that over the last 8 years, I've gone from being a very effective and productive and successful business leader to being 100% disabled and dependent on others for most of my care. I also let the FDA know that pain and fatigue that I have to deal with and fight every day is on some days so intense that I just have to quit, and I hit the recliner early. It's embarrassing and humiliating to have my wife do so much for me and wait on me hand and foot, but I really have no other choice. And I've spoken to so many of my other fellow sarcoidosis friends, and as Heidi mentioned, that we all face the same struggle every day. And my wife and I have also had to make changes to our social life, and because of this illness and the effect and impact that it has on my body. And we related this to the FDA. I know many normal people, they don't have to go on breakfast dates with their wives, but that's something that we do. Or normal people don't have to wait till the day of their date just to decide if they feel okay enough to go see a matinee movie. And nighttime events are off the page for us too, and that has caused us to lose a fair amount of friends and acquaintances. This is real life stuff with sarcoidosis, and the FDA needed to know that. So bottom line, Tricia, through these impacts of our daily life, I wanted to show the FDA that the true burden that sarcoidosis has on us patients.
Thank you, Jim. And Jean, I'm going to direct that next question to you. As Jim was mentioning, you play such a significant role in his support and his care as his caregiver. Why do you think it's important for the FDA to understand how the impact of this particular disease moves beyond an individual?
Well, the FDA hears every day about the patient's daily challenges that they face with the disease, but they have to understand the support team that they have and the true needs that they have. The burden that the caregivers face is huge. You know, I have to get up early every morning and get the day started, which makes my day even longer. I get his meds started and I start from there and I go on because his meds are is a long list. I have to take over doing most of the cooking now, which was his joy, but he just doesn't have the strength or the energy anymore. All the housework now falls on me. Two, I don't get a break. I can't call in sick. I can't go on vacation. It's a full-time job, 24/7. I have total loss of all my independence and I don't have any me time. If I do get a chance to get away, even if it's for a little bit, it's not good because I'm totally worried about him constantly when I'm gone. So it's not a comfortable time. I was able to share with the FDA that being a caregiver also wears you down mentally and physically. I hate to see that what the disease is doing to him. And then I get to bear the brunt of what's going on with him and his outcomes. It just isn't fair. That is what I needed the FDA to hear and to understand. It's just not about the patients. For every sarcoidosis patient, there's a caregiver that is impacted. I hope my story illustrated the need to consider the ripple effect of the disease.
Thank you so much, Jean, for sharing that as well and representing caregivers on this FDA listening session as an important voice. Jessica, I wanted to ask you, I know as we just heard from both Jean and Jim, the day-to-day can be really complicated. You helped to hone in a little bit more specifically in your discussion based off of what we heard from the whole community in the surveys on how drugs that people are taking can really make that more complicated. Can you say a little bit more about how the current medications available and how that can have an impact on your health in general and on your mental health and how you share that with the FDA?
Yes, thank you, Tricia. I first let the FDA know and made it clear that pulmonary sarcoidosis does not exist in a bubble. I, like many other patients, live with pulmonary sarcoidosis as well as sarcoidosis in a number of other organs. However, for me personally, neurosarcoidosis has caused the most issues. The only drug that was mentioned to me for treatment was steroids. And I let the FDA know that I was not informed of any other options. So in my mind, steroids were the only medication to help me get better, not even knowing exactly what that looked like. And I wanted to paint a clear picture to the FDA of what my personal struggle with steroids, what that actually looked like. And I started with letting them know that as a result of taking the high dose of steroids, the long list of horrendous side effects made it far worse for me than the disease itself. The neurosarcoidosis, for instance, caused grand mal seizures, which critically affected my quality of life. But the steroids were a different story. I wanted to share with the FDA how the steroids negatively affected my life. I gained more than 80 pounds, and every day I struggled with bouts of depression, rage, mood swings, and insomnia. I could actually feel myself changing from the inside out. It got to the point I no longer had a desire to live. And I cannot imagine the pain I would have caused my husband, my 2 young children at that time, and my family if I would have taken my own life. It hurts to even think about it. And that's just not fair and not acceptable.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you for sharing, again, such a personal experience with how this impacted your life and being able to share all the ways that these drugs that are currently available aren't meeting the needs of the community and being responsive, especially with regard to steroids. We hear so often from the community on the negative impact of steroids and how we need to be able to move beyond that to other therapies. And with that in mind, I want to turn to Erica. Erica, you helped to emphasize that we do need new drugs, but we also need to be thinking about what clinical trials look like as we move through this process. So the process for getting to those new drugs, we need to think a little bit more broadly about what that might include. Can you share a little bit about what you emphasized and why you think that was important for the FDA to hear?
Sure. Thank you for asking me, Tricia. Some of the barriers that I faced as a single working mom centered around having knowledge of the various trials, accessibility, location, and my providers not being aware of the said trials. A lot of the clinical trials that could help me were on the East Coast, which is really far from where I live. At one time, I had even considered moving so that I could be closer to the clinical trials. After feeling defeated, I had stopped considering clinical trials because there were none in my area. No accessibility, no choice of trials, a small support system, and challenges with childcare and financial resources. These are all barriers to having clinical trials as a viable care option. And even if I did get into clinical trials, if they are not local, then there's the additional burden of hoping that the trial provider will be accommodating of my work and my financial needs.
Thank you so much, Erica. And in your accounting of this, you did such a nice job of thinking so broadly for all the different representatives that have this desire to be in clinical trials. And I just want to thank you for thinking and being able to represent that voice widely in putting that forth to the FDA and giving a concrete example through your own life for that. Catherine, you know, it makes me think about the fact that we're talking about clinical trials and we've been talking about therapies, but you took us back a little bit further in the process. And you talked a lot about how the tools for diagnosis need to be improved and how challenging it was for you to get that diagnostic journey. Can you share a little bit about that and what you hope that, or what you think that impact will be from what you had shared?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So sharing my message with the FDA regarding my challenges to reaching a timely diagnosis and improving diagnostic paths was an important step to bring an awareness about sarcoidosis, which we all know is a multi-system disease associated with significant symptom burden and impaired quality of life. I was given an opportunity to highlight the importance of shortening my path to diagnosis, which includes offering comprehensive care through FDA-approved pharmacological interventions to reduce pain and suffering, decrease disease progression, and improve quality of life outcomes. Also, carefully assessing and reassessing during the diagnostic disease screening process, which translates into collecting more information through a standardized screening process to include things like early detection and better patient education, reliable disease surveillance, detailed information on organ involvement, symptom burden and severity, longitudinal changes in symptoms, and cumulative and debilitating side effects of medications. Of course, access to specialists and shared decision-making, and the advantages or disadvantages to continuing therapy. I also stress the need for improved testing to detect sarcoidosis. While there are not specific tests to diagnose the disease, there are laboratory workups that can offer a clearer picture. Also, the need for real-time technology within a framework with best practices for a clear path to diagnosis will require detection by monitoring and confirming clinical findings. The heterogeneity of sarcoidosis and disease course is difficult for clinicians to predict. Currently, biomarkers for monitoring and diagnosing sarcoidosis is limited. My message to the FDA was a request to create a real-time technology to identify, diagnose, and shorten the time from diagnosis to treatment by challenging the current criteria, and also by creating a standardized process that includes better testing, improved data collection by merging and processing and storing this information in a database, also by monitoring and reducing poor quality of life outcomes for sarcoidosis patients. And last but not least, by creating a workable framework with best practices to reach the intended outcome, which is a clear path to diagnosis.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and for giving so much care and thinking about the ways that we need to improve that diagnostic process beyond just the diagnosis that happens in the clinic, but talking about new and innovative technologies. This is an area where the FDA has some folks that are working specifically on this and thinking about the ways that those new and innovative technologies are something that we are hopeful that the FDA will think of sarcoidosis as those are coming forward to them. Jim, I'm going to circle back to you for a moment, and I want to ask you, as you felt it necessary to highlight for the FDA that you're continuing to fight every single day. I've heard you say that a number of times, but you also fight not just the disease, but to make sure that you have a meaningful life and that you're able to do that. Can you say a little bit about how you have hope as a result of this?
Sure. I mean, I shared with the FDA how much of my life I've had to give up, but most of all, family time, especially around the holidays. And this part hurts, and I hope that really got their attention. If I could just get a little bit of my life back before it's my time to go, that would be amazing. And there's still so much I want to do, and so many others I want to help. I'm very involved with FSR, and that's what drives me. And I sure would like to give my wife a little break. You've heard how much that she gives to me. And even if I could just stop the loss of any more of my life moments, get me and all of us that you've heard today an effective treatment that puts a halt to the decline in our bodies, that would just be awesome. My hope is that through sharing our stories with the FDA, that they would understand our urgency. And that's really our hope, that we don't have time to wait. We need better therapies, we need better treatments, and we need them now. And that's why I continue to fight every day. And that's where my hope lies.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. And so Heidi, Jim just talked about, how important it is with the work that he's doing with FSR. It makes me think a little bit about why you believe actions like this that the FSR is taking in engaging with the FDA and others is important in helping to move the needle forward.
Yeah, I think it's the combined power of all of our stories together, which really can move mountains. When FSR brings opportunities like this to patients, it gives us the ability to really pull back the curtain and to expose to key stakeholders what it really is like to live with the disease and the burdens that it puts on us. And that facilitates change, that really moves the needle. It shines a spotlight on the disease in a way that I think has not been done before. So I think that is so huge and so important. If the NIH and the FDA are talking more about sarcoidosis, then I'm optimistic that our pharmaceutical partners will have more options for drug development. There's going to be more interest from researchers, young up and coming physicians to get into this field and to make a difference. And I think that, the positive momentum builds on itself and it really starts to fuel itself. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary of, what I call my official diagnosis. And this is the most hopeful I have been seeing what's come out of this so far. And it's only been a couple months. So I think it's just a milestone event, and I see more of these coming down the road, and I'm really excited about that, and I'm just so hopeful.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Jessica, I wanted to piggyback on Heidi there and ask you specifically what your hope is for new therapies as a result of this listening session.
Sure. My sincere hope is that the FDA will work expeditiously to approve new and improved drug therapies for sarcoidosis treatment. And just like Jim said, we don't have any time to waste. We need those new drugs now. There are also many providers like Dr. Meyer that treat sarcoidosis patients who compassionately feel the same way and strongly desire to be able to provide us with more FDA-approved drugs to choose from. They see and hear patients struggle with the steroid side effects, and I am sure find it very difficult to manage both the sarcoidosis and potential, if not already present, comorbidities. It is frustrating, it is expensive, and can possibly be avoided. We are not yet at the point to change or reverse the sarcoidosis diagnosis with a cure. I am hopeful, but with the help of the FDA, can change the way sarcoidosis is properly treated.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And I think we all share that hope. So Jean, as someone who is caring for and who loves someone living with sarcoidosis, how do you hope this will increase the urgency for that drug approval that Jessica was just speaking of?
Well, after hearing my heart, I hope the FDA understands that it's just not fun to be a caregiver for a sarcoidosis patient, no matter how much you love them. Keeping us caregivers in mind, knowing that double the impact requires double the effort in finding new therapies. We can't wait. We need it now. We need to find a better treatment so that sarcoidosis doesn't put more families through what we're going through now.
Thank you so much, and appreciate that perspective of that. We need it now, and we all need it now. As a community, we need it now. Erica, I want to know what makes you most hopeful about this session that will change in the clinical trial process as a result of your discussion and the discussions of others on this panel.
I'm hopeful that the FDA will see that sarcoidosis affects so many people in various communities. I hope that our stories serve as an alarm bell to signal more fervor is needed in diversifying clinical trial participants. I also hope that regulators will truly see those of us impacted the most by sarcoidosis and make the necessary changes to ensure we all have equal access to participating in clinical trials.
Thank you so much for that. And Catherine, I'm going to give you the last word on this panel, and then welcome everyone. If you have any questions, to please put them in the chat because we'll continue with a Q&A session here. But Catherine, my question for you is, how do you hope that your message to the FDA will lend legitimacy to sarcoidosis and help make the medical community better understand when someone's coming to them and they're seeking that diagnosis, what's going on?
Great question. So I hope my message to the FDA will be used as a tool for clinicians and researchers to translate the patient experience into medical concepts used for better diagnostic testing, real-time technology, and the timely interpretation of medical tests. I believe that my message highlighted my personal experience in the complexities of living with sarcoidosis and living through the prolonged diagnostic process. I communicated the importance of self-advocacy and the need to shorten the time frame from the information gathering, integration and interpretation phase to reaching a clear diagnosis and treatment option.
Thank you so much. Again, I invite anyone that has any questions to please type them into the chat and we'll help to facilitate them. At this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Meyer, if you would like to turn your camera back on. I have a question that starts with a question specifically that's been identified for you. So, we just heard the fantastic science and information that you were able to share to give guidance to the FDA about what's actually happening in this space. As a result of this session, where do you see drug development and clinical trials going in the future? And what do you think that will mean for the patient?
Well, first of all, I think that because of sessions like this, as well as the patients here and other places speaking out about this disease, that industry, drug developers, even investigators trying to get funding through NIH are listening and trying to include patient-reported outcomes, patient symptoms as as a part of their outcome panel. And we've seen this most recently in a couple of studies that have been published in sarcoidosis and still are looking to get that full regulation. I think, again, my hope is that we can continue to be more inclusive, as has been brought up by our patient group, but also in regards to how and what organs that are being included. People aren't just pulmonary sarcoidosis or just neurologic disease. They have a number of different problems going on in many cases, and we really need to be addressing the entire patient. And I really hope that that will be the case. I really do think that the FDA did and hopefully will continue to hear about the rapidity at which we need to be thinking about drugs that have been used for other diseases and how we can move those down the pipeline. And certainly that's one of my hopes that we will continue to see. So more inclusive clinical trials with multiple outcomes and endpoints and a pipeline that moves much faster.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meyer. And thank you, Mary, for jumping on, because I was just about to invite you as well to join on camera, as I've gotten a question for you, and one that I think a couple of other members of the panel can join in on, as well as members of our Women of Color Committee. But specifically, Dr. Meyer was just talking about the need for more inclusive trials. Mary, can you share a little bit about what FSR is doing to try to drive that as well home?
Thank you, Tricia, for that really important question. And yes, there's a couple of actually phases to this answer. I think, the first thing that FSR has been doing is to bring education around the importance and the scientific fact that African-American women have the highest prevalence and by far the worst outcomes, unfortunately, for sarcoidosis. So it's critically important that the African-American community is aware of this and educated about this, as well as clinicians that are educated about this and aware of this, and that we work to, start the conversations between the clinicians and the whole African-American community about the importance in enrolling in sarcoidosis clinical trials. We believe that if we can get a better understanding from the community that suffers the worst outcomes and has the highest prevalence, that no doubt would, provide learnings that would help everyone living with sarcoidosis. So this is really an important effort that FSR has been working on. We launched a national campaign called Ignore No More, and we were so pleased by the tremendous success and most importantly, the partnerships with 23 partners and the media. We had over 500,000 media impressions. So phase 2 of this is now really focusing on specifically models and ways, again, that we can create to ensure that we have more African Americans enrolled in sarcoidosis clinical trials. And I might just add one more thing. It was so pleasing to see that we had such an increase in African American women, especially in the patient registry at FSR. Since the beginning of the year, which we no doubt, we are sure that is a direct result from the Ignore No More campaign and the messaging that we've been talking about. So thank you for that important question.
I'd like to just invite Jessica, Catherine, or Erica, if any of you would like to speak, if you just kind of raise your hand, I'll call you out on this as well, since you all are playing such a pivotal role in this work as well. Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you. And just like Mary said, one, education is so very key. We want to educate the community. We want to educate African-American women. And because if we don't educate them, of course, they won't know. And of course, receiving the education, we as patients are our own best advocate. We cannot depend upon our doctors to know this information. It will be nice, but first, when we receive it, we can then share it with our doctors. So it's that, that sharing community. I myself shared it just today in my neurologist follow-up appointment with my nurse practitioner. And then two, I would say getting involved, of course, being here for this event like tonight, going back, watching this again, of course, sharing it with other African-American women and just keeping the ball rolling, because just as Mary said, we're not only helping African-American women, we're helping all sarcoidosis patients better understand this disease process, better understand a quick diagnosis, better understand how to properly treat it, better medication. So it's going to be a win-win for everyone.
Thank you. Dr. Meyer, we got a question about what the role of clinicians can be in helping to drive this kind of change. Would you, as a clinician, as our representative clinician on the panel, be able to share what you think clinicians would be able to do to help drive change in this space?
Well, first of all, I think we need to keep listening to our patients. I worry that for a long time we haven't. I will tell you again, fatigue, as each of our wonderfully outspoken and well-spoken patients have shared with us. This impacts people's daily lives in ways that isn't always captured. So I think we have to listen to our patients, and we have to figure out how to take those messages that we're hearing from them and put them into action. So I think being involved with your patients in this regard, whether it's at a support group, whether it's at your visits with your patient, or even better, talking to industry, to pharma, to your scientific colleagues to make sure that they understand that these are some of the issues also. That's going to be where we can continue to move forward, as well as helping to address and identify some of the unique manifestations or more common manifestations of this disease.
Thank you, Dr. Meyer. Mary, I'm going to build on that for you, and I invite all the other panelists, anyone that would like to speak after directing this to Mary. I'll direct it back to you all as well. But Mary, what can patients do? What can the community do to help build on this momentum?
Thank you. That's a great question. And thank you to those who are interested in building upon this momentum, because it's critically important that we all do that. So first of all, I think, we've all seen tonight how incredibly powerful patient stories are and care partner stories, incredibly powerful to really be able to give understanding to others about living with sarcoidosis and the barriers and burden of that. So I would encourage people to share their story. So how can they share the story? So people could write a blog and we can share that out with the community. You can share it on social media by doing even, these informal videos with your cameras, really effective these days to be able to do that. Helping to amplify and share the messaging that FSR is sending out. Again, trying to reach more people, trying to get the messaging out. That can definitely be impactful. And then also, there are opportunities for community members to become volunteers with FSR, to either be an advocate, navigator. We have a speaker bureau that members can join, patient advisory committees that patients get involved in to talk about, how we can continue the momentum. So there's lots of ways to engage. And as a matter of fact, in the survey that everybody will be receiving after tonight's webinar, there is a question in there for people to respond to. And the question is about your interest in joining us in our advocacy efforts. And so we are very interested in having the community members come on as official advocacy efforts, working with us. We've been doing a lot of work in that space, working with coalitions and again, the federal agencies in Capitol Hill. But again, critically important to have a number of patients continue that work with us. And I know that there are patients, Jim, you've been extremely powerful in that space, and others. But, to work collectively is my point, and bring the power to the community with specific asks that can be addressed, and continuing to build momentum is, we believe, very critically important.
So I'm going to redirect this to the panel, and anyone, again, if you want to speak, just kind of raise your hand a bit on this. But do you have any insights on how others in the community, patients, caregivers, other people that are in your circle that could be getting involved to help drive and build on this momentum? Anyone want to chime in? Jim, go ahead.
Talk to your doctor. It starts there. And if you are a patient with sarcoidosis, talk to your doctor. And if they have any questions, they can contact the foundation, or they can just drive their questions and look to the website. But ask questions of your doctor, or if you are not comfortable with your doctor, you know, it's okay to trade in doctors and go find another. We haven't talked about it a lot on this webinar, but FSR has just recently launched a global alliance, and there are a lot of great sarcoidosis clinics out there, and there are a lot of great doctors out there. So don't settle for mediocre. Your care is very important.
Thank you so much, Jim. Dr. Meyer, I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to combine a number of questions that we're seeing here. So specifically, what are you hoping the FDA heard about what the future of clinical trials needs to look like? And then in that, how can we work with industry to make that kind of movement happen?
So first of all, I do want to voice that while there's still a lot of work to be done, I think, again, efforts that you all have, as well as many people out in the community, whether they're physicians, providers, other patients, that there is a spotlight being shown on sarcoidosis. And so I think we have an opportunity here to really try to take this and run with it. And I think, again, that my hope is that PA will be able to move faster, that if we have more patients and more providers, either together or separately, talking to industry, that will help. We are seeing a big increase in industry's interest in this disease, understanding that it's really an unmet need in an area that they can have an impact. And so again, I'm hoping that will really be something that the FDA also is seeing and hearing. I think the more that the patients are letting their providers know, and or the providers who are working with industry continue to voice the importance of having multiple, composite kind of outcomes, the more likely we are to have that happen. And again, I really would love to see that we have access for people of all backgrounds and locations. And again, I want to commend Erica for that point too. I see a lot of people in my clinic that aren't just in my city, but are living in rural areas where they don't always have access. So I think those are some of the messages and my hope of where the FDA will take some of this.
Thank you. And so I think as we start to come to a close here, I want to just take a moment. And I think the thing that came from me, or what I heard from all of you that really struck me, is the hope that you walked away from this session with. That this is hopeful for you, that there's ability and opportunity for change, that this is momentum that we can build on, that there is excitement here that we can take and move into the next step. And with that, I'm going to invite the panelists to turn off your cameras. And Mary, if you could keep yours on, and if you want to share some closing statements, as I know you're focusing on what those next steps might look like.
Great. Thank you, Tricia, for that. And yeah, so for next steps, to continue to build on the momentum and to continue to raise awareness and continue to educate ourselves about this important endeavor, the first thing that the community can do is, if you've not done this already, is to read the white paper. FSR did write a white paper, and you can access that from the homepage of FSR's website. It's really provides some more details. Share the white paper with your physicians, as we've just been talking about, right? Your next visit, bring it with you, share it with them. Share it with the clinics, with family members, with the community at large. There's a lot of important information in there, and it's a beautifully written report that summarizes what we've been talking about. Another next step in this process is, I'm not sure if everyone on the call is aware, but in 2012, the FDA established a patient-focused drug development initiative. And this is to more systematically obtain the patient perspective on specific diseases and their currently available treatments. And so these are public events, larger industry can participate. And so we are going to be, we're actually already starting the planning for one for the fall of 2023, next year. This takes significant time to put this together. And we are just going to be, ensuring that key stakeholders, advocates, researchers, developers, healthcare providers and others have the opportunity again to hear from the patient voices and to be part of this. Third thing is we talked about continuing the conversation, sharing the stories. Please have this really important messaging and effort at the forefront so that we continue to build upon the momentum. The other thing FSR is interested in doing in the near future is hosting other FDA patient listening sessions. So as an example, cardiac sarcoidosis. As we're all aware, sarcoidosis can impact and have multiple manifestations. So it's important to focus on those as well. So I think that's part of the future. And also, we haven't widely announced this yet. We just spoke about it for the first time at our patient summit over the weekend. But we're very excited about the fact that FSR is opening a Washington, D.C. office on September 1. And so we're very excited about that. We're going to have a presence in our nation's capital where we'll be building upon our advocacy efforts at the federal level. We will be doing a congressional briefing next year as well. And we're also going to be doing an annual Sarcoidosis Research Awards Gala at Union Station in May of next year. So a lot of things are going to be happening in Washington. They already have been, but with a permanent presence there with an office. This is going to really, again, continue to help build upon the momentum and really be there 24/7. The organization will continue to have headquarters in Chicago, but I wanted to go and highlight that. So lots of ways to continue the momentum. I just want to say with a heartfelt thanks to Jim and Jean and Heidi, Erica, Catherine, and Jessica. You are amazing. It was such an honor to work with you throughout this, have our team work with you. Your collective stories were so powerful and delivered the really important messaging to really help, get more therapies, get better equipment for diagnosis, all of these important things for the sarcoidosis community. You should be very proud of representing the sarcoidosis community through your powerful stories. And thank you to Dr. Meyer, our esteemed scientific advisory board member, who just did an extraordinary job of providing the research and the science to the FDA and for this patient listening session. We're so very grateful for your leadership and your ongoing passion and commitment. And finally, just again, a thank you to the FDA. We are so very grateful to the FDA and inspired by their significant interest, as I mentioned, with attendance and feedback. We are very hopeful that we can continue to work very closely and really have an impact in this area for urgency, getting better therapies quickly, and really making a difference for those living with sarcoidosis. Thank you to the FDA. And we look forward to those continuing conversations and events as we've talked about. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Tricia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. And I'm going to close out here with a reminder. In the chat, you see our survey that is in the chat for you all to fill out. We'll also be sending it out via email to you. We urge you to please fill out this survey. This information that you give us drives the information and the messaging that we use to drive forward. Please fill out the survey. Please continue to engage with us and keep an eye on all the different ways that you can be involved. We're eager to continue these efforts, and we thank you. Thank you all.